Hi, I'm Meta Spencer. Today we're going to go to Oregon and Germany. Two women are going to talk to us about humiliation. And I think it's absolutely the most central issue that peace activists should be thinking about, because I have always believed that the most important motivation for violence and resentment and conflict is shame and humiliation. And these are two women who've made it their profession and their academic career to study that phenomenon. So in Hamelin, Germany is Dr. Evelyn Lindner, who is, I think, has a very varied career in all kinds of things, from medicine to psychology to political science and a whole bunch of other things that don't normally go together, but it's wonderful. She's the author of research on humiliation and a network of people who study humiliation. And in Oregon, I think you said, is Linda Hartley, who also has a PhD thesis. Both of them wrote PhD dissertations about humiliation, and they're pretty rare. There are very, very few, if any, other studies of that kind. And Linda did a PhD on, I guess, the psychology of humiliation and made a scale of it and so on. So they got together and they've been working together every day by Zoom for many years and have an organization. And it's terrific. They've been producing shows that I will show you how to access in a bit. I want to say good morning, Evelyn. Say hi to me.
Lovely to meet you, Meta. We met for the first time in 2010 in Oslo. You remember, perhaps, it was the Nobel Peace Prize Centenary Conference.
Yeah, I was just bowled over that you remember all the details of that. I remember meeting you. I remember your long braid more than anything else. You have one long braid that is really an impressive accomplishment. Anyway, but I didn't remember whether it was Stockholm or Oslo. So there you go. And hello, Linda. How are you?
Oh, thank you, Meta. It's a great honor and pleasure to be with you. We're very excited because of the wonderful programs you're putting together and having conversations with people to bring out ideas together. That is one of our role model activities for our work.
Well, it's absolutely the most fun I've had maybe in my whole life, because I've never had such a rich social life, and I wouldn't have been able to even consider it until, Zoom came along and COVID made it a realistic thing to do. And now I just spend hours every day having a good time talking to people all over the world. Just wonderful. So you're one of you're grist for my mill, or you're fodder for my cannon, or I don't know what we are. Anyway, we are going to talk about humiliation. And I think the topic is absolutely crucial. And so, Linda, no, I thought let's start with Evelyn, because Evelyn was about to tell me about her work in Egypt, and was giving me an example of the way in which different people have different experiences of humiliation, and that causes real consternation and difficulty reconciling them. Go back and start your story all over again, Evelyn.
Thank you so much, dear Meta. I just want to say that you are our role model. Oh. Linda and I plan to become 120 and work until the last day like you. So we will follow you.
Well, I'm not 120. I'm working on it, but I've got a way to go. I'm almost 91. So here we go. And well, you're my role model. So there you go. We'll tell me about this. You were telling me about
Yes.
a very interesting situation.
Linda was the first one to study humiliation before me. She finalized her doctoral dissertation in 1995. So I was very fortunate that I could build on her work. And she studied and she will explain more later, the individual experience of humiliation. While I looked at how it might be felt and interpreted and acted on in different contexts throughout the world. And I said that I worked as a clinical psychologist for many years in Egypt, but we know about honor killing not just happening in Egypt. In many parts of the world, we have what is called honor killing or femicide. And I use this just as a story, as an illustration of how complex the dynamics of humiliation can be. And I start with asking you to imagine that you sit in front of a mother who is crying. And she says to you, our daughter has been raped. We have tried to hide it, to cover it up, to marry her to the rapist. Nothing worked. Now the family honor is humiliated, violated, soiled, and the only way to remedy that, to repair that, is to kill her. And there I sit and I listen and I feel profoundly humiliated. My humanity I feel humiliated deeply by this suggestion that humiliation can be repaired by killing. I feel that the girl needs trauma therapy. It's double humiliation to kill her. And she must live. So there is one universe, moral universe, where the girl must die. Then there is another universe, mine, where the girl must live. And if I had said that to her, to the mother, and said to her, look, I feel humiliated by what you say. What kind of mother are you? How can you do that? Then she would feel humiliated by me and say to me, oh, you are an arrogant Western person who humiliates our culture, my culture. So there we have two moral universes that are irreconcilable. The girl must die, the girl must live. These, you cannot say, oh, I accept both or I condone both. No, one has to decide. And then there is a meta level where both universes, the adherents of both universes, feel humiliated by each other. So that's the complexity of the situation.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I agree. Absolutely.
And then I said that my life's work can be described like that. Like, I'm sitting there in front of the mother, and I have asked myself for years and years and years when I worked in that way, why do I think I'm right? And how can I talk to the mother without humiliating her? And so that she, what can I tell her that she feels what I feel? What is the context that makes me feel what I feel? And so this is my life's work. So now the story is finished.
Tell me if you've come up with an answer to that, because I think that is one of the most interesting problems that I see right now. For example, there's a debate going on about whether or not, this sounds silly, but it's real, whether or not to humiliate Putin. I believe that Macron a few weeks ago said it's important we should not humiliate Russia. Well, I think it's really true that the reason Putin attacked and the reason he's supported by so many other Russians is that they all have this impression that the West has humiliated them and that the loss of the empire, the Russian, Tsarist empire, or whether it's the Soviet empire or whatever, he's trying to put back to the Soviet Union now. Okay. So I understand why Macron said, we want to bring them back into the world community. And you can't do that if you ostracize them too much. So, don't humiliate them now. Well, it's kind of hard not to when you think that they violated every universal human right that you can think of. And I don't quite know how to do it. How do we keep from humiliating them? If you say that's what you've been trying to spend your life trying to figure out, how to deal with people in ways that do not humiliate them, and yet make a certain point that you think needs to be made. Let's hear your answer. Boy, I've been looking for it.
Wow.
One thing that we learned early on in our work, starting with Don Klein, who is one of the fathers of community psychology, and his focus on prevention and systemic change, he emphasized that humiliation has this habit of acting like a boomerang effect, which is we send out humiliation, it will come back to us. And we've taken that to heart, realizing that as far as we know, over these years that we've been studying this experience, there's no real positive benefit to humiliation. And I think maybe people get confused because they see shame, and shame does have some positive benefit in signaling that we have damaged a relationship. But humiliation, in contrast, is very damaging. It's a profound relational violation, and we have yet to be convinced that there's a positive side of
Okay,
it.
now here we're getting somewhere, because I have never thought about the distinction between shame and humiliation. That you're going to have to work on.
Yes.
I'm not going to disagree with you yet, but you have to tell me how you see the difference.
Well, Evelyn, you can add to this, but I look at it as shame does have some similar overlap in that it is really a core experience. You feel shame at the core. Shame at the same time tells us about our standing within relationships. When we hurt somebody, we may feel ashamed of what we did. And that's a useful side of shame. We wouldn't want to live in a shameless society. We want people to have that sensitivity to pay attention to relationships. And that's where I'm coming. My background is looking at relational psychology and how these dynamics work together. And shame, I believe, serves a positive social relational purpose.
I absolutely 1,000% agree with that. And I think that the most important thing I learned from Barack Obama was when he said that his mother, when he did something she disapproved of, she would say to him, "How would you feel if somebody did that to you?" And she was relentless. She demanded that he actually feel it, try to imagine what that would be like. And of course, if he really felt it, he would feel ashamed or he'd feel guilty, one or the other, because of having hurt somebody. And so I think that it is very important for parents to insist that their children actually learn to empathize, which does mean, I think, being subject to the emotions of shame and guilt, and not be let off the hook until they do. Do we agree on that point?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Absolutely. This is the relational awareness that we think is so vital to really moving in a constructive direction, whether it's on the individual level or the social level or the international level. Mm-hmm. It is awareness of relationships. And in our organization, we emphasize putting relationships first, which in our view is a pretty radical notion in this world, in that we look at our relationships and the work grows out of those relationships instead of putting the work first and then the relationships. So what you're saying is
okay. Now let me throw you another. It's premature to do this, but I will. I want to give you a dilemma of mine about what to think about these things. On the one hand, I've been convinced for a very long time that most of the wars and conflicts in the world are motivated not by material real interests, land or property or that kind of material well-being that divides different groups, so much as by their sense of relative dignity compared to each other. And here I've been influenced very much by Max Weber, who made the distinction between class and status, and class being based on material interest primarily, and status being the kinds of rivalries that take place between groups without necessarily being affected by, or they can be connected, but they don't have to be. The sense of having more prestige than some other group, or having lost prestige when you shouldn't have, and the resentment that comes from having slipped in the ranking of things. It's always a subjective comparative ranking rather than absolute ranking. And I think that, right now what's going on in Russia is they are so resentful about having lost status, gone from being one of the two great world superpowers to being having lower average income than Italy, and so on, lower even gross income than Italy, and the sense of having not been respected. They're constantly saying that they've been humiliated and degraded and not given the kind of recognition that they deserve by Western countries who are triumphalist is the word they use, and so on. So this resentment, I think, is really a motivating factor. And of course, if you want to prevent that, you've got to figure out a way to assuage the touchy feelings of politicians and other people. So on the one hand, I think it's really important to be very careful not to humiliate people. But on the other hand, there's another phenomenon that I believe I've noticed, and maybe it's relevant to what you are saying or not, but it's different. I think that the reason that Donald Trump was elected was precisely because he refused to feel shame, and he got away with it. He could, and I grew up until I was 12 years old in Oklahoma, and I remember these little boys in school who had all kinds of anti-feminist vulgarity. I think that is, there was a certain swagger of little boys trying to show who could use the dirtiest language and who could be the most, who could get into the most other girls, the girls at school and whatever. And now that stuff is unacceptable. That kind of behavior, even before the Me Too movement, that kind of behavior became absolutely not tolerable. So people can't get away with that anymore. Talking vulgar, boasting about being shameless in not being embarrassed. I mean, no matter what you do, Donald Trump will never, ever be embarrassed or shamed. He will pretend that he was proud of it, and he'll boast of it, and he'll defy anybody to think there's anything wrong with it. And because he can get away with it, I can see there are millions of people who envy and admire him and want to be able to do the same, but they can't. But he's their hero precisely because he, I don't know whether you want to say he can't be humiliated, but I know he can't be shamed. You cannot make that man acknowledge that he's embarrassed. So these two visions of what should be done, I don't know in either case what to do. I can imagine ways of trying to be super polite to people who might be offended, like the Russians, because they think they've lost status when it wasn't right for them to lose status. And I don't know quite how to make it up to them because they really have lost status. And that I don't know how to overcome that reality. But also, on the other hand, I sure don't want to confirm the shamelessness of right-wing politics that is animated precisely as a way of giving the finger to, if you don't mind my vulgarity, giving, really deliberately, showing their opposition to and their defiance of social norms that are upheld by polite society and by Democrats in the U.S. How do you reconcile those two perspectives, if you can accept one or both, and what do you do in either case to help these people solve their hangups, each one?
Big questions, Meta. Big questions. I am sitting here thinking about, this is the Trump situation is, I couldn't agree with you more that he is not, he spent a lifetime not being shamed and not accepting shame for actions. And we see the outcome of that. But it reminds me that these issues are systemic, that we need to look way upstream at what are the conditions that led to this situation where this person has gained power in such a way that mobilizes people who have felt that they've been humiliated in society, whether we're talking about people who have been economically disadvantaged and so forth. And what are those conditions, and how do we change those conditions so we reduce the chances that we end up with a leader such as Donald Trump, who is able to mobilize people's, what Evelyn, her term that she uses that I think is so important, he's a humiliation entrepreneur. He's mobilizing people's feelings of humiliation for the purpose of, I think, self-interest, but also power. But Evelyn, I think, could probably speak even more to that.
Thank you.
I have so many thoughts now. Yes, I think it's a bit too late now. I started with my work many years ago, and I said in 2006, my first book, Making Enemies, Humiliation and International Conflict, I said we can be we are lucky as long as humiliation entrepreneurs, the Hitlers of this world, we are spared them. Somehow my emphasis has always been on prevention, and I think we have been neglecting prevention, systemic prevention as humanity as a whole for many years. And of course it's a bit silly to say that when it's too late a bit, but
I don't think it's silly, but I think you're asking an awful lot of people. Yes. Because I when I try to imagine how to confer dignity on people that I don't actually respect, I'm just torn, because I think, yes, it would be a lot better if we had not triumphed over or flaunted our superiority over the vanquished party in a war, but had treated them with more respect. But it's just very hard to do. Yes. And it's especially hard, especially if you've been victimized. But and it's even hard for me to pretend to be egalitarian and respectful to people whose values I deplore. And so I feel torn. I want to be, I want to prevent humiliating them. I want to keep myself from contributing to their humiliation, let's put it that way. But I'm not sure I can.
Yes, I feel that I can when I know people closer. So this is the benefit of my global life, perhaps, that I learned to love people I disagree profoundly with. And this is then a common ground. The shared love is the common ground, like with the mother in my story. If I know this mother and we love each other, then there is a common ground to talk. So my global life is really a practice of loving people so that I can talk and that I can respect them and I understand them, because I respect them when I understand why they act as they act. And and what I try, you asked me before what I would try to explain to the mother. And given that I have a relationship with her where we have a common ground, this is the precondition that I have to build, and we have to build first. But when I have a relationship with that person, then I can basically hold the lecture to her, or I have explained my view on human history many times in all my lectures, and I simply try to explain that. And the basic thing is, I think, the difference between honor humiliation and dignity humiliation, because they are profoundly different, and they arose historically in different contexts. And as soon as one understands the context, one can understand also what comes out of it.
Please,
So,
I want to hear that.
Yeah, for example, when you look at the macro level, like the Versailles treaties after the First World War, they were intentionally humiliating Germany. And this was in the context of honor humiliation. In honor humiliation, the belief is that to humiliate somebody makes this person humble, or the state. The aim was to make Germany humble and harmless. And this is something that a practice that has been around for the past perhaps 10,000 years or more. You might have had an interview with Riane Eisler, perhaps. If not,
I know who you're referring to, but I haven't. Yes.
Yes, because she coined this terminology of dominator model of society versus partnership model of society. And the dominators model of society, this is built around the notion of honor humiliation. This is like I work a lot in Norway, and until 1868, it was legally allowed for a husband to beat his disobedient wife, to humiliate her, you could say, to make her humble, to make her respect the hierarchy, to make her respect his superiority. So humiliation in dominator contexts, humiliation is regarded as a beneficial pro-social tool by the masses, by the superiors, to keep the hierarchy in place. And in a very interesting linguistic shift from honor humiliation to dignity humiliation is in 1757 in the English language. Very astonishingly, for the first time in 1757 in the encyclopedia, to humiliate is explained as to violate the dignity of a person, of an individual. And so suddenly it's a violation. It's no longer pro-social. Suddenly it's anti-social. So in dominator context, humiliation, to humiliate, is seen as a pro-social tool by superiors, to beat, to humiliate, to routinely humiliate their underlings, their inferiors, so as to keep their hierarchy in place, so as to teach them their lowly place. And so basically the most important turning point is, of course, 1948. There, the core sentence of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is every human being is born free and equal in dignity and rights. And this is a revolutionary sentence. Before, in the historically times before, this sentence would have been impossible. In the dominator context, it's impossible. It would be every person is born unequal in worthiness and rights, and some are freer than others. That would be the sentence before. So the new sentence from 1948 somehow rings in a new time, a time of equal dignity for everyone, no longer unequal honor for everyone. And this is the big turning point. And we are in the transition between these, the old and the new, you could say. And you and Linda and I, we are deeply, deeply embedded in the new, in this sense that every human being deserves, has inherent equal dignity. That is our deep conviction. And but this is not the deep conviction of people in other parts of the world, or in not just the world, you know, like those people who think that hierarchy is God-given and the nature's order. They don't resonate with our deep gut feeling.
Okay, but I'm troubled by maybe we didn't finish the conversation about the difference between shame and humiliation. I think Linda started that, but we got sidetracked because we agreed that that shame is a good thing, and that it can be, you know, because you use shame to make people, you want people to avoid being shamed, so they behave themselves, because they know that if they get caught doing something disgraceful, they will really be embarrassed and feel shame. So to keep from ever feeling shame, they behave properly, and in order to maintain their empathy with another person that they may have hurt, they behave themselves and feel ashamed if they have done harm to that other person, because they feel with that other person. So we've agreed that this is a good thing to use, and to even use it on children, to insist that children recognize when they've done something shameful. And I do. Now, the same thing applies. I remember a recent conversation with somebody about international law. There are not many ways of enforcing international law. We don't have an international police force, and I don't think we want one. But we use sanctions, and we shame people. We shame other nations by telling them that they violated international law. And if we don't have that, I don't know what we're going to use. We need even stronger things than shame. But so I'm hung up. I'm not. You say that you and she and Linda and I agree that we want to avoid humiliating people by impugning their honor, or and we want to believe that everybody has dignity at all times. But I'm not sure I do. There are times I really want to make people ashamed of themselves, so they'll stop doing what they're doing that's wrong.
Yeah, I think there is no contradiction. There is no contradiction. It depends on being ashamed of what. Like when the husband beats his wife so that she should accept being his servant. This, I think you and I and Linda, we would say his aim to make his wife feel ashamed, we would not resonate with that, I think.
No, but I would want him to feel ashamed of doing it.
Yes, exactly. So there are different cases. So we want him to be ashamed, not her. So the depends on the context and who for what aim, for what goal somebody should feel ashamed.
Yes, and I was going to say what's striking me, Meta, is the difference between wanting someone to feel ashamed because they've violated or they've hurt somebody else, which I think is a good thing, and shaming, which can be, I think, just another form of humiliation. To actively shame other people can be a form of humiliating that person. And so now that brings up the question, and this gets to the point that this is such a complex topic. It does depend on the context in which these things occur. And we want people to feel shame when they recognize that they have violated their own code of conduct or they have hurt other people. But do we want to actively shame them in order to get them to comply? So shaming as a tool versus shame as an emotional experience that recognize I've hurt this relationship. That's where I'm getting.
Well, but I think we use shame constructively sometimes. I'm really ambivalent about it because I half of me says shame is the thing that most animates people to start wars. They resent having been debased somehow, lost their dignity or lost their prestige or lost their position in the ranking of society and feel that they don't deserve this downgrading. So I think that is the main reason for war. There, in fact, was a study by Ned Richard, somebody, who made a classification 10, 15 years ago, a book that I can't remember. But he classified hundreds of wars throughout history and into 4 different types. I can't remember the whole typology, but the most common source of war, as he saw it, was the resentment on the part of an aggrieved nation or party that felt that they had lost, they'd been deprived of their rightful position, and it's sort of, they were going to kind of make up for it. So I think that's really true, that the wars, most wars are not really for material gain, but to right a sense of status, and yet, so people don't have any legitimate means of disciplining countries that violate international law. I mean, if Russia aggresses against Ukraine, the International Court of Justice says, stop it right now. And of course, they don't stop. They don't even bat an eye. They just go right ahead. Nobody expected them to obey. So there's no obedience. There's no police force that can go in. There's not. So what do? We try to shame them into behaving. And it may not be the best method, but we don't have many others.
When I grew up in Germany, and I learned really to understand how Hitler acted. Basically, he took the shame, he spoke to the shame in the population and said, look, you shouldn't be ashamed. This is a humiliation perpetrated on you. You shouldn't accept it. This shame you feel is not right. It's not legitimate for us to feel ashamed. We should feel angry. These people try to shame us. We should not accept that. We should not let them do that to us. We should reject that, and we should fight back. So, if somebody tries, I did my dissertation research in Somalia, and this is a country of proud warriors. And they said to me, we don't have humiliation. We don't accept being humiliated. Then we kill or die.
That sounds Greek to me. Sounds like the ancient Greeks.
Right. Mm. So this is always this thing, shaming somebody with the hope that they should become humble and harmless can be a boomerang, you know.
I have to agree, absolutely. On the other hand, I'm right now reading a book by Susan Neiman, What We Should Learn from the Germans, or How We Should, something like that. And she's a Jewish American who moved to Germany and is recounting the transition that people made because apparently after the war, the Germans, now here I'm reporting one point of view. I have no opinion because I don't know anything about it, but I believe she and another man I interviewed, Constantin Gebert, recently, said that the Germans at first were not really remorseful, that they'd been conquered, and they felt that they had to conform to the victors who were occupying their country, and so on, and so they would behave as if they were repentant, but they weren't really repentant, and they didn't really feel ashamed, and they didn't talk about it. But then, for some reason, in I think he said 1968, there was a turnaround, and the children of the Nazis, former Nazis, then began to say, "What did you do? Look at what you have done. Aren't you ashamed?" and the kids then enforced a real discussion where the entire society, unlike Japan, or certainly even unlike Russia after Stalin, unlike many other countries, I don't know how many, actually went through a period of introspection and acceptance of shame or remorse for what they had done. And there was a real turnaround. And they began making reparations and that sort of thing. Now, I don't know whether this is true or not. Is this consistent with your own impression?
Many, of course, it's simplified, but of course, yeah, it's a main thread, main development, yes.
So it was the kids who insisted that their parents should reflect and feel ashamed.
Not in all cases, of course. As I said, it's a simplified narrative, but many people were, of course, ashamed when it happened, and other people are not yet ashamed today.
I see. Mm-hmm.
But what I think it illustrates, Meta, and that this is a restoration of relationships through dialogue in a dignifying manner, which is one of the key goals of our work, is to engage in dialogue in our differences with dignity. And actually what you do when you have these conversations like we're having today.
Yeah, but I haven't ever really had a conversation with somebody I despise. That's if I invite, I can think of some people that I would not really want to invite on because I don't think I could be nice to them. It's easy to be nice to you. I like everything you say, even though I don't fully see how I can apply it, because I'm torn about, in any one situation, how to treat another person whose behavior I deplore. You know, my friend Arlie Hochschild has been she wrote a book called Strangers in Their Own Land, where she went to Louisiana and was trying to understand the point of view of the people who were in the Tea Party at the time. It's really before the Trump movement. And her analysis was that they felt that it wasn't money. It was they felt they had lost their position in society somehow, and the respect that was due to them, and they resented it. And now she's hanging out with Nazis in, I think, Kentucky or North Carolina or South, I don't know, someplace in that area, and trying to get inside their heads. I don't think last time I heard, she hadn't really got into anybody's mind very closely. But it's with the same analysis that these young Nazis, well, you know, they use the term replacement theory. Replacement theory means you will not, they go around marching and they have these torchlight parades like the Nazis did, you will not replace us, meaning Jews, and I don't know who else will not replace us. That, they're afraid of losing status in society. And how do you treat these people? How do you make them feel more, that they do belong, when I don't respect them and I can't pretend very well to respect them?
You have to greet her when you speak next time to her. She's on our global advisory board, I think. I have been in touch with her many years.
She's a very dear friend, but she's so busy I don't get time with her much anymore. We both are too busy, but these days I'll get her on my talk show and I'll pass on the word.
Right. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Please do.
Yeah. But now, I mean, to me, that's I couldn't do her work. I couldn't do it. If I were to go to a Nazi rally, how could I act as if I had respect for their dignity?
We had our first conference in Paris in 2003. We have 2 conferences per year, as Linda said, one in New York at Columbia University and another one in another country each year. And the first one was in Paris. And I'm not sure whether you know Arne Næss.
I know the name, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yes, Arne Næss, one of the most renowned Norwegian philosophers. He came to our conference and with his wife, and he was very old. And I think already the year after, he was no longer able to speak. So I held his hand. I remember I was holding his hand. Linda was there too. And he was speaking, and he was talking about how he would invite people who had murdered other people, who would invite them from prison into his philosophy class at the university in Oslo. And he would do that so as to show to his students that there are no murderers, he said. There are only people who have murdered. There are no murderers, only people who have murdered. And so he would not, of course, minimize the murder or be more, he was horrified by their deeds, but not by the people. That was his differentiation. And I think this is my differentiation also. Well,
I remember reading accounts of when the Truth and Reconciliation process was going on in South Africa. There were people who they were expected to show contrition, I think, to really show remorse before they could be forgiven. And there were cases in which I remember one in particular where a woman and I believe her grown daughter, went to the jail cell of a man who had tortured her husband to death. And in this case, he was so overcome with shame and, well, more than shame, guilt and remorse and regret that there was no question in her mind that he was really sorry. And as they parted, as she got up to leave, they hugged each other. And now that can happen, but I think it can only happen if he has shown his deep remorse.
Absolutely, yes. Absolutely. We had one amazing man speak. You might know him, Aaron Lazar. Mm-hmm. You know him, huh? Mm-hmm. It's a psychiatrist. He passed away years ago, and he came to our conference in New York. Linda, you remember surely, and he talked about apology and how when you apologize, you cannot expect that the person will forgive you quickly. You have to really, it needs time, and you have to show that you are sorry, as you say now, and show remorse. And it takes time. It cannot be easily and quickly accepted. It really is a process. It's not just, you cannot just say, oh, I'm sorry. No, it's not enough.
Yeah. Well, I agree with that. And there's a wonderful book that I read a few months ago called something like, Why Can't You Apologize? And it's a
Wow.
woman who specializes in, trying to help people repair their relationships. And it really is fundamental that the person who has, that the person who's really hurt another person must feel deeply regretful
Yeah.
and apologize. Not just a slight apology,
Yes.
but a real regret and really
Yeah.
understanding what the person has felt.
Yes.
And there are people who can do it and there are people who can't. And
Yes.
then she also talks about the period of time that it frequently takes for the injured person to be able to accept the apology, or even to fully comprehend that it was sincere.
Yeah.
It's hard to do sometimes. So
Yes.
some people can and some can't. And she
Yeah.
does not try to press people to accept somebody's offhand apology at all.
Right.
In fact, she
Right.
never
Right.
presses anybody. I think actually Desmond Tutu also made it a point of never saying you have to accept the apology or you should accept the apology. He would hope that it'd be possible, but if it's not, he would accept the reality that it wasn't really accepted.
Yeah. And sometimes, apology, like when I did my field work in Rwanda, some people said, how can I forgive? How can I forgive? My mother was brutally murdered. My family was brutally murdered. I cannot forgive on their behalf somehow. Who am I to forgive?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah.
I've seen that argument.
Yeah.
I appreciate the fact that your book talks about the time it takes to build those relational bridges after there's been damage. And one of the fundamental ideas that we've learned in our work is the importance of listening others into voice, helping them tell their story. So we gain the kind of understanding we need to understand what happened without condoning it, without recognizing that there wasn't, without really acknowledging that there has been some harm done, but listening others into voice so we know their whole story of how they got to this point where they did this terrible thing. And sometimes that can lead to the possibility of apology or mutual recognition as human to human relationships. So we emphasize the importance of movement in relationships and how do we create conditions so people can move in their relationships to a better place in those relationships. And that takes time, as you were pointing out.
I had a talk show a few months ago with my friend Joy Kogawa, who is a dear friend, and she's a Japanese Canadian who wrote a book called Obasan, largely about the experience of Japanese Canadians during World War II. But she and I have had a kind of an ongoing dispute, and we talked about it in that talk show, in which she believes, as a fervent Christian, that everybody should be unconditionally forgiving at all times to everybody. You should be forgiving all the time and without exception. And I take the view that, yes, at some level, I recognize that we're all one and that we're all interconnected, and that I can even see that I love all kinds of people that I dislike, liking them and respecting them and believing that they're right and agreeing with them is entirely different from loving them. I can love somebody that I have pity for, or that I think, oh, you poor misguided soul, I love you, but boy, you're a hopeless case. And so we really talked about the disparity between our different convictions about what is the right thing to do. And I believe that it's possible to love, but that one has a duty to hold others accountable.
You know, you're reminding me, Meta, that I'm just reading a book on the Violence Project. I think one of the authors is James Densley. And he and his colleague have been talking with those who have engaged in mass shootings to find out their stories, because he saw in the media that they would just talk about them as evil, as monsters. And through his work, he has urged us to look at how people get on that pathway that resulted in this event, to humanize these people. And what he had to do to understand that is to talk to all these people around them to find out what is this person's story that they ended up at this place where they did such harm. So I think what Evelyn was saying earlier about the importance of prevention, how do we create the conditions that help people move toward growth, fostering mutually beneficial relationships in all that we do, is a key focus of our work. And how can we do it early on, before these disruptions, these profound relational violations, and the humiliation that grows out of those experiences starts taking shape? Because once that humiliation occurs, it's really hard to go back and repair those relationships. So that's really a huge focus of our work, Meta.
Then you work very much to the level of individuals. And I don't see how we can do therapy on 8 billion people.
It's true.
They all need it. Every one of them needs it. Because I do too. Probably everybody does. Well, I've had mine, but I've had enough. I don't want any more. But I certainly understand why it's really important to look at one's own life and one's own emotional history and one's relationships, past relationships. And that the going forward does require kind of an assessment of what I did in that relationship and what maybe I should have done differently, and so on. So what you're doing is absolutely wonderful, but you can't do it for everybody. We have to change a whole culture. Right. And I don't know how to change. Well, I've got some ideas about how to change a culture, but I don't. But I don't think it will involve having people stand up and confess to the misdeeds that they really should feel remorse for. I don't know how to do that on a mass scale. And how are we going to prevent wars? I mean, if you couldn't get to Vladimir Putin, but somebody should have quite a few years ago.
Yeah.
You're so right. We have to get beyond the individual solutions, even though those relationships we see as critically important. And I think that's why our group has initiated this project with the World Dignity University, because we have so many diverse members of the human dignity humiliation studies community that are working in a full range of ways, whether it's individual, but also socially in their communities, in academia, in these different conflict zones. We try to create a space where they can come together and bring their ideas and have conversations with people who are working in a wide range of ways, not just the individual level, but the large scale systemic way. Can
I add that the title of our next conference is from United Nations, basically from disunited nations to united people. That's the title of our next conference. And it's in Amman in Jordan. And we are invited by by El Hassan bin Talal, His Royal Highness Prince El Hassan bin Talal, who was at the helm of the Club of Rome for many years. You remember the Club of Rome published the first Limits of Growth report in 1972, and he was at the helm of this Club of Rome for many years. And he is a thinker who is thinking about exactly your questions since decades, and he is a very international thinker, or you say a global thinker. He is not just drawing on Anglo-Saxon literature and thinkers, also on French, on Arabic, in Indian. So he looks at the global arena. And we have learned to highly appreciate him as a thinker and as a mover of exactly that, what you are calling for, a global impact. And he has founded what is called the Royal Institute for Interfaith Studies. And this institute will be the host of our coming conference in Amman from the 5th of September, 3 days. And everybody who listens now is invited to sign up on Zoom, because it is a hybrid conference. I will be there. Linda will be in Oregon. And we have 10 people from our network there and the rest from Jordan. And the topic is exactly what you are calling for now. What needs to be done? If we look at apartheid, when apartheid was installed or put in place, it was not regarded as a violation of dignity. It was regarded as a solution. It simply meant segregation. And it was seen as a solution for problems that were caused by the Boer Wars before. And so then at some point it became synonymous with violation of systemic violation of dignity, not one person against one person, but systemic. And I think this is what is the case today in the world. And it needs a movement similarly, but globally. And of course, this sounds utopian, but I think it's utopia. I don't know how to say it in English. It's utopia. Yeah. It's a beneficial utopia. I think if we continue with business as usual, this is impossible utopia. We need a new kind of realism that embraces that we go from disunited nations to united people globally.
Evelyn and Linda, I think what you are doing is just extremely important. I can't think of anybody who's doing anything quite like it, and I just hats off to you. I'm going to put your the link to, is it your website, this humiiationstudies.org? Right. And I believe that you have videos there which people can watch. I'm going to watch a bunch of them, and I will be following. I can't go to Jordan, but I will want to see as much as I can of what you do there this September, because it sounds like it is just what we need to have people thinking about most. Bless you. Wonderful work. And I've enjoyed, it's more than enjoyed. I've been deeply, profoundly affected and moved and impressed by this conversation. So carry on, my dear friends. It's excellent to be in touch with you. Bye.
Thank you so much. We admire you.
Yes.
Carry on. We will stay in touch. Bless you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Project Save the World produces one of these shows 3 days a week, and sometimes more. This is episode number 473. You can watch them or listen to them as audio podcasts on our website, to savetheworld.ca. And we even post the transcripts there sometimes eventually. When you get to that website, look around. We have conversations there all the time about 6 global issues, plus potential reforms in governance, economics, and civil society. To find a particular talk show, enter its title or episode number in the search bar, or the name of one of the guest speakers. And after you've watched or listened, scroll down and share your thoughts about the show. This is a place for dialogue. Project Save the World also produces a quarterly online publication, Peace Magazine. You can buy a single copy or subscribe for $20 Canadian per year through Pressreader. Just go to pressreader.com on your browser and in the search bar, enter the word peace. You'll see the cover of the current issue and buttons to click to subscribe.